welcome back for another Music Theory Bite. In this video, we're going to talk about the diatonic triads in the major and minor modes. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then this is the video for you. Let's start with a couple of quick definitions. A triad, you'll remember from my video on spelling triads, is a three-note chord created by stacking thirds on top of each other. It consists of three elements, a root, a third, and a fifth, and triads have a couple of characteristics. They have root, they have quality, and they have inversion. Diatonic means triads that occur within a key without using accidentals. So these are triads that will show up in a particular key where we don't have to alter any of the pitches in order for them to show up naturally. We contrast that with chromatic, which means that we would have to use accidentals in order to spell the triad correctly. Every key has several diatonic triads, one for each note of the scale. Musicians need a way to describe these so that ultimately this really becomes an issue of labeling musical sounds. These descriptions or labels have two potential purposes: to tell another musician what notes or chords to play, and to communicate something about the function of each chord, or you could think of it as the job that it has to do in the structure and the narrative of the music. You would think it would be great if we could come up with a labeling system that told us both things. And there are some out there, but they haven't been widely adopted by musicians. For performers, their primary concern is figuring out what to play, and they'll let their ears tell them each chord's function. For theorists and analysts, the primary concern is figuring out how the music works. So knowing the specific pitches isn't nearly as important as figuring out what job they are fulfilling in the musical texture. So what I'm going to show you in this video focuses on what the theorists want to know. How do we label chords so that we can figure out what's their job in the musical structure? If I create the metaphor of music as a language, each word in a sentence has a job to do. Pronouns and nouns generally say who or what acted, and verbs say what they did. So for example, I could say something like, he ran, she walked. He and she are pronouns that tell who is acting, and ran and walked are verbs that tell what the actors did. We label words in a sentence as parts of speech, based on the job that they do conveying meaning. And that also tells us where they would typically show up, or in what order the words would typically be used when we construct a sentence. Typically in English, we start with the noun or pronoun, followed by the verb. And of course, the modifying words, such as adjectives and adverbs, get fit in to describe particular nouns and verbs. We can think of chords in music as being like words in language. They have specific jobs to do, and they come in specifically defined orders. Otherwise, the music just doesn't quite sound right. That, in a nutshell, is musical function. Musical function tells me, when I'm hearing or playing a particular chord, what that chord is doing in the structure of the phrase, and it also tells me what chord can possibly come next and still sound stylistically correct. I'll cover the ins and outs of harmonic function in a later video. First, we need to figure out our equivalent of the parts of speech, how we can label chords in such a way that will let us figure out their function, and once we learn about function, in what order we can put them in order to make music that sounds stylistically correct. What complicates things a bit is the fact that music is fully transposable. I can play the same music starting on any pitch. And the music will, more or less, sound the same. The relationships between the pitches will be identical from one key to the next. So an F major chord will do one job, have a particular function in F major, but will have a very different job in another key, like B flat major. That means a labeling system that only tells me what notes or chords to play, such as jazz chord symbols, doesn't tell me what I need to know to understand what's going on in the music and to anticipate what should come next. I need a functional labeling system to do that. The system that most music theory classes use is the Roman numeral labeling system. I'll show you how the Roman numeral labeling system is created and organized in both the major and minor keys. But ultimately, what you need to do is memorize what the diatonic triads are in both major and minor. And eventually, we'll be able to equate these to the particular chords in each key. The good news is that the triad qualities are the same for all keys. All major keys have the same functional label for the tonic chord, or the subdominant chord, or the dominant chord, just as all minor keys do the same thing. The supertonic will always have the same function, the submediant will always have the same function. So, if you memorize the system for one key, you've memorized the system for all keys. We can easily figure out the diatonic triads. Let's start in major by writing a major scale. We'll go in the key of E flat major for this one. On top of each of the pitches of the scale, we can stack 2/3, creating triads. I've labeled the root and quality of each triad using jazz chord symbols above the staff. Here in the key of E flat major, we have an E flat major triad on the tonic, F minor on the supertonic, G minor on the mediant, A flat major on the subdominant, B flat major on the dominant, C minor on the submediant, and D diminished on the leading tone triad. I've grayed out the repeat of the tonic triad up an octave because that's basically just a duplication of what happens on the tonic. In order to label these chords functionally, what we'll do is we'll indicate the scale degree number for each chord using a Roman numeral. 1 for tonic, 2 for supertonic, 3 for mediant, and so on. The way we write these Roman numerals also tells us about the chord's quality. We'll use capital Roman numerals to denote major triads, such as on the tonic, subdominant, and dominant. Lowercase Roman numerals to denote minor, such as on the supertonic, mediant, and submediant. And lowercase with a degree sign to denote diminished triads, such as the leading tone triad. Notice that when I place the system next to the system built on another key, in this case C major, the jazz chord symbols change. They show me different chord roots, although the qualities remain the same. Notice also that the Roman numerals don't change. The Roman numerals between E flat major and C major are identical. We could do that for any major key, and the Roman numerals would still be the same. What that means is I will know that the tonic triad will always be a major chord labeled with the Roman numeral 1. The supertonic and mediant triads will always be minor triads labeled with the Roman numerals 2 and 3 respectively. Likewise, the subdominant and dominant will always be major triads labeled with capital Roman numeral 4 and capital Roman numeral 5 respectively. The submediant will always be a lowercase or minor Roman numeral 6, and the leading tone triad will always be a diminished triad labeled with Roman numeral 7. Don't forget the degree sign. Eventually, I'll want to memorize for each key the specific chord root and quality that goes along with each of these Roman numerals. In this case, in E flat major, my tonic triad is always an E flat major triad. But in D major, my tonic triad would be a D major triad, and in F sharp major, my tonic triad would be an F sharp major triad. In the key of G major, The supertonic triad will always be an A minor triad. In D major, the supertonic will be an E minor triad. A good way to do this is to memorize the chord functions and qualities, the Roman numerals, and then spend a little bit of time each week memorizing a new key, and within a couple of weeks you'll have all the triads for the keys memorized. Now that we have the diatonic triads in major figured out, let's do the same for the minor mode. This is a little bit more involved based on the structure of the minor key. Let's deal with D minor. We start by spelling a natural minor scale. Now what makes it a little bit more complicated is, you'll remember from my video on spelling major and minor scales, that the minor scale has two variable scale degrees. Scale degree 6 and scale degree 7 have two positions, a raised position and a lowered position. So first I'm going to add in the raised 6th and the raised 7th scale degree to my D natural minor scale so that I have all of the possibilities. Next I will build triads on each of my scale degrees. And here I also have to add a few extra triads. Any triad that contains scale degree 6 or scale degree 7 needs to have two different versions so that we can accommodate both the lowered 6th and lowered 7th scale degree. Now I'm ready to add the jazz chord symbols for each chord. And finally, using the same system as I used in the major mode, I'll add the Roman numerals. Major triads get a capital Roman numeral, minor triads get a lowercase Roman numeral, diminished triads get a lowercase Roman numeral with a degree sign, and I do have an augmented triad in here which will have an uppercase Roman numeral with a plus sign after it. So you can see I have major triads built on the 3rd scale degree when the 7th scale degree is in its lowered position, on the 4th scale degree when the 6th scale degree is in its raised position, on the 5th scale degree when the 7th scale degree is on its raised position, in the 6th scale degree when the 6th scale degree is in its lowered position, and on the 7th scale degree when the 7th scale degree is in its lowered position. You'll notice also that when chord roots are in the raised position, not accommodated by the key signature, I put a little accidental ahead of the Roman numeral just to indicate which particular version of the 6th and 7th scale degree I'm dealing with. I have minor triads on the tonic scale degree, on the supertonic when 6th is in its raised position, on the subdominant when 6 is in its lowered position, and on the dominant when 7 is in its lowered position. Unlike the major mode, not all of these chords are thought of as diatonic. You'll remember from my video on spelling scales that the 7th scale degree is typically only raised on dominant function chords. If you haven't yet learned about the harmonic functions, that's okay. You'll get to that soon. Dominant function chords are the dominant triad and the leading tone triad. That is the chord built on the raised 7th scale degree. That means that we don't typically have a minor dominant triad, so the lowercase 5 doesn't typically show up in the minor tonal system. The subtonic triad, however, does, for reasons I'll explain later in my video on harmonic progression, so we'll keep that one in our system for now. All other chords that use the raised 7th scale degree can then safely be removed because they are not dominant function chords, so we wouldn't typically see them in the major-minor tonal system. So our augmented mediant triad can go away. Now let's deal with chords that have the 6th scale degree. The 6th scale degree is typically raised only when it is serving as a passing tone between scale degrees 5 and raised 7 while supported by dominant harmony. So it typically only shows up when scale degree 7 is already raised. What that means for us right now is any chord with the raised 6th scale degree can be removed, since none of those chords are dominant function chords. Now, these chords are theoretically possible if we're taking that passing tone between 5 and raised 7 and harmonizing it. Those would be about the only context that we'd see these things show up. But that's fairly rare, so we're going to take those out, and that leaves us with these chords. I'll completely remove those chords that are not typically thought of as being part of the major-minor tonal system, but keep in mind that a composer on occasion might sneak one of these in as a chromatic or non-functional chord. So know that they do exist, but are just very rare. So our diatonic minor chords are the minor tonic, the diminished supertonic, the major mediant, the minor subdominant, the major dominant, the major submediant, built on the lowered 6th scale degree, the major subtonic, built on the lowered 7th scale degree, the diminished leading tone triad, built on the raised 7th scale degree, and the diminished leading tone triad, built on the raised 7th scale degree. You may remember from the beginning of this video that I described the diatonic triads as those that appear in a key without the use of accidentals. So you're probably wondering how I can justify putting the major dominant and diminished leading tone triad in my system when both of those are going to have to use the raised leading tone, which requires an accidental in the minor mode. Well, that's a bit complicated to explain. Many theorists, most theorists, think of that raised leading tone as being a diatonic pitch in the key and not a chromatic pitch, although there is some argument about that. For the purpose of this video, and for the way that I teach music theory, I think of that leading tone as being a diatonic pitch in the key, even though it does require an accidental. So we'll leave that in there. Just as we did with the major system, if we put our chords next to the system for a different transposition of minor, we'll say C minor, the jazz chord symbols change, but the Roman numerals don't. They will be the same for all minor keys. So the complete major-minor tonal system looks like this. We have the major system on top and the minor system on the bottom. And I've also included the chords that show up rarely, although I don't consider those to be diatonic triads in the minor mode. For now, it's enough to memorize this system. You'll figure out how to use it in later videos. Well, that does it for this video. If you found it helpful, as always, please like, feel free to leave constructive comments below, and as always, subscribe to my channel so you can keep up on the latest music theory bites as they become available. Until next time.